Okay, today we're looking at chapter 5, section 5.1, and so we're going to start factoring. And so what really is factoring? Well, if anybody asks you what the factors of 6 would be, I don't think anybody has any trouble saying, well, that's 2 times 3. 2 and 3 are the factors of 6 because they multiply to give you 6. So with factoring, we're looking at the multiplication problem that gives us that original answer. So when we're looking at these algebraically, they all come from problems we did in chapter 4 when we were multiplying them. So the first one we're going to look at is a common factor, but first let's look at a problem from chapter 4 that this problem might have come from. So say I had a 2x times, x plus 5. This multiplication problem we would have distributed and got 2x times x is 2x squared, and 2x times a positive 5 is a positive 10x. So what we're doing today is we're starting here, and we've got to work backwards to find out what this multiplication problem was that it started from. And so the first thing we're always going to do on any problem we work for factoring from here on out is, number one, we're going to check for a common factor. You always want to check for a common factor first. Excuse me. So when we look at this problem, in order to get a common factor, you want the largest common number and the smallest of the exponents. Now this is not really mathematical terms, but this is just the way for you to kind of think of it. So first we're looking for the largest factor that they have in common. So when we look at 5 and 15, the shortcut is to go to the smaller number 5, just like we talked about with fractions. And if 5 will divide into 15, which it will, 5 goes into 15, then 5 is our common factor. But the reason that is you can also look at the factors. The factors of 5 are just 1 times 5, and the factors of 15 are 3 times 5. So what's the largest factor that they have in common? Is that 5. So I put the largest common number, but also meant factor. But we're going to look at our numbers first and then our letters. So you want the largest factor, or the largest number that'll divide into both of the numbers. And then you look at your exponents and you want the smallest of the exponents. Well, this one 15 doesn't have a y, so you can only take out things that have in common. So if they don't both have a y, then you can't take a y out. So for this one, all we can factor out is a 5 as their common factor. And again, we're looking for that multiplication problem. So the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So here I would say 5y squared divided by 5. See, the 5's would cancel out, leaving me a y squared. The plus comes down. And then 15 divided by 5 is 3. And so this is our answer, our factors. The nice thing about these problems is you can check yourself and see if it multiplies out. Does 5 times y squared equal 5y squared? Yes. And does 5 times positive 3 equal positive 15? Yes. So we did this correctly. So that's factoring out a common factor. Let's look at this next one. So first we're going to look at our numbers. And like I said, the shortcut is to go to the smaller number and say, will 6 divide into 12? And the answer is yes. So 6 is our common factor. You can't do 12 because 12 won't go into 6. 6 goes into 12. And so when you're looking at your factors, the factors here are 1 times 6 and the factors here are 2 times 6. 6 is the largest number they have in common, but it's actually the smaller of the two numbers. That kind of gets confusing. But if the smaller one will go into the bigger one, then the smaller one is your common factor. Then we look at our letters. We have an x2 and an x4. We want to take the smallest of the exponents, so we're going to take out x2. You take the smaller one because x to the 4 has 2 x's, but x to the 2 does not have 4 of the x's, so you take out the smaller of the exponents. And then you divide. Here 6 divided by 6 is 1, and x2 divided by x2, 2 minus 2 leaves 0 of the x's. So really all of this cancels out, but you have to hold the place with a 1 because 6 divided by 6 is 1. So if you don't have anything left, you hold that place with a 1. Then the minus comes down. 12 divided by 6 is 2. And then x4 divided by x2 is x2. 2. And that's your factored form. Again, you can always check by multiplying it back out to make sure that it multiplies to what you started with. Okay, this next one's a little bit harder, but we're still going to go to our smaller number 12 and say, will 12 divide evenly into 18? And the answer is no. So you can think about all your factors of 12, and a lot of people can just look at it and know that it's 6. But if you don't know that, still go back to your smaller number 12 and divide it by 2. So there our factor would be 2 times 6. And then check there and see of the bigger, 6 is a bigger number, so will 6 divide into 18? Yes, so 6 is our common factor. If 6 won't, then you want to go to your next factor, which would be 3 times 4. But for this one, normally the first little dividing it by 2 will usually get your common factor. But if not, you can keep going until you find the one that works. Because for 12 and 18, 6 would go into there, 4 would go into there, 2 would go into there. There's a lot, 4 wouldn't go into there, 3 would go into there. There's a lot of numbers that will go into both 12 and 18, but you want the largest one, which is 6, and you can get that by dividing that into 2. When you divide 12 by 2, it gives you the next largest factor. So 6 is our common factor. Then we look at our x4 and our x3. We take out the smaller one, which is x3. So the biggest number they have in common, but the smallest exponent. And now we start dividing. So 12 divided by 6 is 2. X4 divided by x3 is x1. Remember, you're subtracting those. 18 divided by 6 is 3. And x3 divided by x3 leaves 0 x's, so you don't have to write any x's there. Okay, this last one on common factors, it has 3 terms, but that's okay. You're still looking for what's the largest common factor of all 3 of these numbers, and then the smallest exponent. So when we look at 20, 10, and 15, go to the smaller number 10. Will 10 go into 20? Yes. But will 10 go into 15? No. So we go back to 10 and think, okay, divide it by 2. That would give us 2 times 5. So there's our next biggest factor. And will 5 go into 15? Yes. Will 5 go into 20? Yes. So 5 is our common factor. Then we look at our exponents. We have an M5, an M4, and an M3. So we take out the smallest, which is an M3. Now up here we had 2 terms to start with, so we had 2 terms in the parentheses. Here we have 3 terms to start with, so we're going to have 3 terms inside the parentheses, because even if everything cancels out, you hold the place with a 1. So now we're going to start dividing. 20 divided by 5 is 4. M5 divided by M3 is M2. We have a plus. 10 divided by 5 is 2. M4 divided by M3 is M. And we have a plus. 15 divided by 5 is 3. And M3 divided by M3 leaves us 0 M's. So that's a common factor. So you always want to check that first. And then we'll talk about in the next lesson some different things that'll happen after that. But today we're going to look at factoring by grouping. So first you check to see if there's a common factor. But you see here 2 and 6 have a 2 in common, but these don't. They don't all have an A, they don't all have an X. There's no common factor. So if you don't have a common factor, then you look at the number of terms. Whoops, that's off camera. So we're going to do problems with 2 terms, 3 terms, but today we're looking at 4 terms. And anytime you have 4 terms, you want to do what's called factor by grouping. So I'll just write the steps out here. So the first step is you want to group the first 2 and the second 2. So what I mean by that is I'm going to put parentheses around the first 2, parentheses around the last 2, and the middle sign comes down. So this middle sign comes down. So that's your first step. Group the first 2, the last 2, and the middle sign comes down. Then what this did was split it into 2 different problems. Now this problem here, we're going to do what we did before, which was take out the common factor. So I'm going to look at just this parentheses, go with the smaller number 2. Will 2 go into 6? Yes. So 2 is our common factor. They don't both have an x, so I can't take out an x. All they have in common is that 2. And then I'm going to divide. 2x divided by 2 is x, plus 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now, it's really important that you bring that middle sign down because it's going to sit there in the middle. And then we're going to look at this parentheses. Well, this is just like a 1 here, so they don't have a factor of it in common other than 1, and 1 doesn't change anything. So they don't have a common factor, but they do have a common letter. Do you see how they both have an A? They don't both have that. Can't talk. They don't both have an X, so we can't take that out, but they do both have an A, so I'm going to factor out the A, and then I'm going to divide. AX divided by A is X, plus 3A divided by A is 3. Okay, so I didn't do step 2. So step 2, you do the common factor. And then step 3, you're going to have what's alike in one parentheses and what's out front in the other. And so what I mean by that is this should always come out the same. If it doesn't, in this book, then it means you did something wrong. When you get up into college algebra, if it doesn't come out the same, then you can rearrange your terms. But in this class, they'll all work out correctly where these should be the same. And so your final answer is 2 sets of parentheses, because remember it's a multiplication problem with what they have alike in one and what's out front in the other. So what they have alike is that x plus 3. And then what I mean by out front is when those x plus 3s are gone, you have left this 2 plus a. My pen's running out there. And so you're left in the other parentheses 2 plus a. And that's your answer. Now remember, multiplication, order doesn't matter, so you could also have the 2 plus a first and then the x plus 3. The order of those parentheses don't matter. They can go either direction. Okay, let's look at this next one. Again, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So we're going to factor by grouping. Group the first 2, the last 2, and this middle sign comes down. Okay, we're going to look at the first parentheses and do the common factor. So first we look at our number. Will 2 go into 4? Yes, so 2 is my common factor. Then we look at our A's. I have A2 and A1. I'm going to take out the smaller one, which is an A1. And then we're going to divide. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And you can write the 1 there, or you don't have to. It doesn't matter. But A2 divided by A1 leaves an A. So if there's not a letter, you have to have that 1 there. But if there is a letter, that letter's holding the place, so it doesn't matter if you don't put your 1 there. And then the minus comes down. 4 divided by 2 is 2. And A divided by A cancels. Now we're going to look at the common factor for this one. So I go to the smaller number 3. Will 3 divide into 6? Yes, you'll see that happens most of the time. I can't take out an A because they don't both have 1, but they do both have a B. They both have a B1, so that's what I'm going to take out is a B1. And then we're going to divide. So here the 3's would cancel, the B's would cancel, and it would leave me an A. But this sign right here is where most people make a mistake. And so I'll do it wrong first. I'll do it in red. Is if you get in a hurry and you bring down a plus, and then you keep going, 6 divided by 3 is 2, and the B's cancel, you notice these are not the same. And that's because of that negative right here. When you bring down a negative, it's going to change that sign, because remember when you distribute a negative, it changes the sign. So if you don't catch it till the end and just replace it with a negative, that's perfectly okay. Or just think a positive 6 divided by a negative 3 is a negative 2, because these need to be the same. So the nice thing is you will catch it if you put the wrong sign as you go to write your answer. Because remember, what's alike goes in 1, A minus 2 goes in 1, and what's out front, 2A minus 3B, goes in the other. Okay, let's do one more example. Again, it's 4 terms, so we're going to group the first 2, the last 2, the middle sign comes down. We're going to look at the common factor for the first parentheses. They don't both have a number, so I don't have to take out a number, but they do both have an x squared. So I'm going to factor out, whoops, I didn't bring my middle sign down. we're gonna factor out an x squared. So do you see everything cancels here? So we have to hold the place with a 1, and then we have a plus, and then 3x squared, the x squared would cancel, leaving me a 3. I must have written that wrong. I did write that wrong. I'm sorry, guys. This is supposed to be a 3 right here. Make sure I wrote the right. Yeah, sorry. That's an x to the third. So 3 minus 2 is going to leave a 1x. Okay, then we're going to divide here. 3x squared divided by x squared is 3. Minus comes down. Then we look at the second parentheses. The smaller number 5 will go into 15, so 5 is our common factor. We can't take out an x because they don't both have one. And now we divide. 5x divided by 5 is x. But remember here, a negative 15 divided by a negative 5 is a positive 3. Again, if you got in a hurry and just brought down a negative 3, no problem. Once you see they're not the same, you can just change that to a plus. And then our final parentheses, remember what they have alike in one and what's out front in the other. So what they have alike is this x plus 3. And what's out front is that x squared minus 5. And so that's factor by grouping and factoring out the common factor. You're now ready to work the practice problems in 5.1.